Made by trolls in Trollhattan, this is the story of one of the greatest car companies in the world, from birth to success and then to its death and troubled resurrection. Hi everyone and welcome to Motorheads. Stick around until the end of this video to find out how Saab went from safety and turbo icon to just another General Motors casualty. Saab was born in 1937, just before World War II started, but there were absolutely no plans for making cars. Who needed them when the old continent was about to enter one of the biggest wars the world would ever see? Right? And so Saab, which is short for Svenska Aeroplan AB, was formed with the objective of making planes for the Great War that began just 2 years later. At the end of the Great Conflict, demand for planes dropped dramatically. Who would have thought, right? So a bunch of smart people at the top of the plane company thought they should diversify. So they tasked a team of just 16 people to make Saab's first ever car. It proved to be a huge endeavor, especially because none of the 16 men had ever worked in the car industry, and to make matters worse, just 2 of them had driving licenses. In 1947 though, just 2 years after work began on the first Saab car, the press laid its eyes on the Ur-Saab. And the team's lack of experience in the car-making business was obvious from the get-go. The Ur-Saab didn't have a boot lid, and the front wheels were tucked under the body. A cool look inspired by planes, and it likely helped with the aerodynamics of the car, but Sweden doesn't really have light winters, so snow had a habit of piling under the front fenders, which didn't really help with, handling, blocking the wheels and all. 2 years later, the trolls from Trollhattan came up with their first ever series production car, the Saab 92. It was heavily influenced by the Ur-Saab before it, but this time it had ditched the hidden wheels in favor of more serviceable open wheel arches. All early 92s were painted green, and legend says that this was because of excess green paint left over from the war effort. There is not much proof behind this theory, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. Under the hood of the 92 was a DKW-derived 764cc 2-stroke, 2-cylinder, 25 horsepower engine that could push the car up to a top speed of 105 km an hour. The enhanced 92, also called 92B, came in 53, and it now offered a boot lid for the first time, which meant you could get to your luggage from the outside of the car. Cool, right? Also, new colors were added to the options list: grey, blue-grey, black and maroon. The successor to the 92 came in 1955. Dubbed Saab 93, it was the Swedes' first exported model. Then, in 1959, came the 95, the company's first family-focused vehicle, which was now available with a 1.5-liter V4 engine sourced from Ford, instead of the aging 2-stroke DKW unit used before. The first taste of success came at the beginning of the 1960s when Saab launched the 96, a car that would make the Swedish brand known worldwide for its safety and rally-capable vehicles. In fact, Erik Karlsson won the Monte Carlo Rally twice at the wheel of a Saab 96 in 1962 and 63. All was well and good for the Swedes until this point, but there was one problem. All their cars made until 1980, when the 96 went out of production, were based on the quirky Ur-Saab prototype from 1947. Crazy, right? In other words, making another new car on a 30-year-old platform didn't really make sense going forward, so work began on Project Gudmund, which would come to fruition in November 1967 when Saab presented the all-new 99 in Stockholm. Every gearhead in the world knows how a Saab looks if you show him the 99, but the smart Swedes were quite ingenious during the testing period of this new car when they tried to hide the truth from the world. In fact, they used widened 96 mules at the beginning, which were actually called toads, and later they slapped Daihatsu badges on the test vehicles in order to fool curious pedestrians. Think about it. Now almost all car makers use this trick to hide a new car under the skin of an existing one, but Saab did this 50 years ago. Production began in 1968 for the brand new 99 with a 1.7-liter engine sourced from Triumph, but because it wasn't really up to par when it came to reliability, Saab eventually made their own 2-liter unit, which was used until the 99's death in 1984. Fun fact, Saab also made 48 prototypes of the 99 that had the same V8 engine used in the British Triumph Stag, but ultimately plans for a Swedish muscle car were dropped in favor of a turbo coupe. And so at the 1977 Frankfurt Motor Show, Saab presented a car that would define 80s car culture, the 99 Turbo. It completely changed how the world saw the Swedish brand, from a safe, family-oriented brand to a sporty and almost hooligan-like attitude. With a force-fed 2-liter engine that made 145 horsepower, the 99 Turbo made everything else turbo as well, from chewing gum to sunglasses and even vacuum cleaners. It was just amazing, and the press loved it. The 70s and 80s represented a weird time for Saab when it came to new cars. Even though the 99 was still in production, they introduced the 900 in 78, which was a modernized version of the 99 itself, and then in 84 came the 90, which had the face of the 99 and the rear of the 900. Unconventional to say the least. In any case, Saab sold about 600,000 99s during its lifetime, which was a huge amount by any measure, weird facelifts and face swaps included. And then, with the introduction of the all-new Saab 9000 in 1984, the same year as the facelifted 90, began the downfall of the famous Swedish carmaker. You see, the Swedes partnered with Fiat for whatever reason to make a big car that would be a good fit for the American market. In the eyes of the Italians, this would merely be a badge-engineered Lancia Thema, Alfa Romeo 164 or Fiat Croma. But Saab had other ideas. When engineers from both camps got back the results from the crash tests, the people from Lancia said they were perfect. On the other hand, the Saab people described them as being not good at all. So the 9000 got bigger wheels, thicker steel for the bodywork, and a completely different rear axle, among other things. In the end, just 7 parts are interchangeable between the Saab 9000 and the Lancia Thema. Of course, all these changes meant Saab was hemorrhaging money, but the Swedes thought that the safety of their customers was above all else, so they sold every single 9000 at a loss for the company. Not a very good thing if you want to, make money and survive. Saab made a similar move a couple of years later after it was bought by General Motors and investor AB, each owning 50% of the Swedish company after the Saab Scania group was restructured into separate entities. The Americans brought a lot of financial know-how to the table, which Saab apparently lacked in those days, and thought that the Swedish maker would make a good luxury brand. And so in 1994 came the second generation Saab 900 built under GM's umbrella, which was heavily based on the Opel Vectra of the time. A year later, the Swedish automaker turned a profit for the first time in 7 years, so things were going well. The modern era of Saab came with the introduction of the all-new 95 in 1997, which was also based on a GM platform. But while the new 900, which would later be facelifted and rebadged as the 93, was a heavy update of the old 900, I know there are a lot of numbers, bear with me, the new 95 didn't really cut it as a luxury car, seeing how it had General Motors switchgear throughout the whole interior. And if you know cars, you know that 90s GM didn't really scream out luxury. In 2000, GM bought the remaining 50% stake from investor AB and became the single owner of the Swedish brand, setting its sights on the next generation of the 9-3, which was based on the Cadillac BLS and Opel Vectra platform and launched in 2002. The car was interesting, but with basically the same underpinnings as a Cadillac BLS and Opel Vectra, the new 9-3 failed to impress in the handling department, with only the hot aero variants making up to 280 horsepower. It was basically a Vectra with a different face and a higher price tag. Sales were dwindling and GM wanted to increase them no matter what, so in 2005 it released two textbook badge-engineered cars, the 9-2X, which was just a Subaru Impreza with another face, and the 9-7X, which was a Chevy Trailblazer playing dress-up. Fun fact, the 9-2X was featured on the American hit series The Office, where it was driven by good old Jim Halpert. Anyway, getting back to the matter at hand. GM's efforts to boost sales were a complete disaster, and so they were quickly discontinued. The 9-2X survived just 2 years, while the 9-7X SUV made it until 2008. With the financial crisis in full swing, General Motors was having doubts about the future of Saab, and so it started looking for a buyer, otherwise it would shut it down completely by 2010. All the while, the cool trolls from Trollhattan were busy working on the second generation of the 9-5, which was a really cool looking sedan that debuted at the 2009 Frankfurt Motor Show and then started to roll off the assembly line as a pre-series model. There was even a wagon in the works, but that didn't get to see the light of day as a series production car, with just a handful of prototypes being made before everything ended. You see, towards the end of the noughties, General Motors pretty much ran out of money and Saab went into administration. Surprisingly, Koenigsegg was this close to buying the once mighty Saab brand in collaboration with a group of Norwegian investors and the Chinese Beijing Automotive Industry Holding, or BAIC. The problem is, the deal fell through because there were a lot of parties involved and they seemingly failed to synchronize in order to close the deal. Nevertheless, GM sold the intellectual property rights and production equipment for the old 9-3 and 9-5 to BAIC, which later began making the BAIC CC Turbo Sport in Asia. Then, at the start of 2010, it was announced that Dutch boutique sports car manufacturer Spyker had bought the Saab company with a huge loan in order to keep things moving. GM would continue to provide engines and transmissions, as well as complete cars that it was making in Mexico. And what Mexican-made Saab, you ask? Well, it was the 9-4X, of course, the most short-lived Saab ever made, built on the same platform as the Cadillac SRX. It was assembled for less than a year in 2011, and you can probably guess why it was cancelled. 2011 was the same year that Saab went into bankruptcy. Big surprise, right? Who would have thought that a tiny company couldn't have possibly sustained a huge car maker like Saab, right? Jokes aside though, it was pretty much the final nail in Saab's coffin. Yes, the company was ultimately bought by a Chinese consortium called National Electric Vehicle Sweden, or NEVS, and yes, the new owner briefly put the 9-3 back into production, but ultimately just 420 new cars were built in 2013 before the factory was closed again. NEVS went into bankruptcy itself in 2014, and after a few rounds of investments from various partners, it changed hands in 2020, and with the new owner came new priorities. NEVS was planning to make electric 9-3s when it first acquired Saab's assets, and it did. Sort of. The only evidence I could find that electric 9-3s exist are a couple of pictures that portray just 10 cars. At the same time though, Turkey is developing its own electric sedan based on the 9-3's platform, so you could say that more will come. they just won't look anything like the Saab before it. I mentioned earlier that Nevs has a new owner. It's called Evergrande, and after it assessed the viability of the old 9.3 in today's environment, it concluded that it wouldn't be cost effective to continue work on it. And I agree with them. It is, at the end of the day, a 20-year-old design, so instead Nevs is apparently going into the autonomous pod business, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Saabs of old. What's good is that there are still 700 people employed at the Trollhattan plant in Sweden, even though the facility hasn't produced anything for over 5 years. Another thing you might have noticed is that after Nevs purchased Saab's assets, the small number of cars they made didn't have Saab's logo on them. And that's because Scania, who owns the rights to the Griffin logo, didn't let the Chinese use it on their cars. And something else that was missing from the Nevs-made cars were General Motors components. Instead, the new owner had to find new suppliers for parts, and this is a huge reason why I think things lingered for so long. It's not really an easy task, you know. So what's in store for the future? Well, Saab as a brand is dead as a rock, but Evergrande, the owner of Nevs, wants to become one of the biggest suppliers of electric car know-how, so it has apparently invested a lot of money into new electric models, which will presumably be built with input from Koenigsegg. Yeah, the same Koenigsegg that once tried to buy Saab. Nothing happened yet though. But there are 2 models out there in the wild that show how those cars could look, and they're not bad at all. And there you have it, the short story of how one of the coolest and most interesting car brands went into the ground. I myself have a sweet spot for Saabs because of their quirkiness and because the last Gen 9.5 looked really nice. In my opinion, at least. But what do you think of Saab? Did you like the cars when the brand was still alive? Let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified every time we post a new video. Thanks for watching.